Hello, my friends. We return to more stories about my my vampire campaigns, and this is going to be the first video on a new campaign that I just started running called Rome by Night. This game takes place in ancient Rome, as implied by the title. And it's a new campaign that I just started. Rather than waiting until it's months in the past, or in some cases years in the past with some of my other videos, I thought I would try and do them a little bit more immediately, just so that it was easier for me to remember what was going on. This is going to cover kind of the first couple of sessions of this game, like the session 0 where we created characters and then got into actually playing. And I'll give just like a brief overview of the characters, the dramatis persona of the House of Cassii. And the first player character is Maximus Cassius Maximus. I know that is a silly name, but you can only exert so much control over your players when they are picking names. I mean, if I left them to their own devices, their names would all be just like Bigus Dickus and Randy Manlove.
I have a very great friend in Rome called Bigus Dickus.
But I managed to at least bring it down to Maximus Maximus. That was where I could pull it back to. So Maximus Maximus is the paterfamilias of the family, or as you may also say, the papa. He is in charge of everything. He is the big cheese within the household who, you know, gets to say what goes and what doesn't go.
Oh, king in the castle, king in the castle. Have a chair, I have a chair.
Maximus is a middle-aged guy. He's a priest of Janus, the god of like change. He is also a former soldier and comes from a very prestigious and wealthy family. The second player character is his wife, Lucretia. Lucretius Vestasia, I believe is how you pronounce it. Lucretia is his second wife, or as Maximus describes it, his second to fifth wife, because we're not entirely clear on how many dead wives Maximus has. There's at least one, and there may have been some others as well. He hasn't quite figured out that part of his backstory. But Lucretia is his most recent wife, and she is formerly one of the Vestal Virgins. The Vestal Virgins were a very important priestesshood. I don't know if you still call it a priesthood if it's all priestesses. They were involved in a bunch of important ceremonial stuff, and similar to nuns in Catholicism, they are not allowed to marry or do any of that stuff. In fact, if you touch a Vestal Virgin,
right to jail, right away.
However, after they serve their tenure, which is like 30 years, 25 or 30 years, I can't remember, they are allowed to retire. They can choose to stay, or they can leave the priesthood. And if they leave, they get a fancy last name that lets people know that they are a person of importance. They also get like a pension for life. And then they, you know, pretty much can do whatever they want with themselves. They're free citizens. In Lucretia's case, she decided to marry another wealthy guy. They also have two children, two living children, the first of whom is another player character, Sharpaphia Cassia. The player who was playing Sharpaphia was not there for the first session to make characters, so she just told me like a brief overview of the character concept she wanted. She's like, I'll be like the teenage daughter who's like really rich and pretentious and just wants to play the harp and doesn't have any interest in what anyone else is doing. A super like self-absorbed teenager. And I was like, oh, okay, perfect. So Cher from Clueless.
Hello?
Do you know what time it is?
Watch doesn't really go with this outfit, Daddy.
And then Sharpaphia's younger half-brother, who is Lucretia's actual son, is Lil Maximus. Lil Maximus is the son of the two player characters, whereas Sharpaphia is like the daughter from a previous marriage. Which was also the case in Clueless, wasn't it? The next two player characters, for 5 total, are not members of the family, technically speaking. They are slaves of the family. The first is Cassandra. Nope. Not that Cassandra. No. This is a completely new Cassandra. She is a Greek slave who is the nurse of the family and who has been responsible for basically raising and caring for most of their children, including little Maximus, most recently, who she's still taking care of, Sharpathia, and also a couple others who died. There was, like I said, an indeterminate number of wives/children between these events, but we haven't really hammered that out yet. And then the last one is Titus. Titus Cassius Aquilus, or Aquila? Titus Aquila. Titus Aquilus. I can't remember his name. Damn it. Titus something. Titus is the chef.
Before we begin, you must all be warned. Nothing here is vegetarian.
So the story begins in 218 BC or BCE, depending on which of the two different date systems you choose to use. They're the same, so it doesn't really matter. And it begins not in Rome, which is where I intend for the story to take place primarily, but in the city of Saguntum. The player characters are in the city, Saguntum, because they are taking care of some family business here, and they have been stuck here for about a year now, because shortly after they arrived and started working here, Hannibal showed up and laid siege to the city. Now this is early in the Roman Republic. Rome is not yet the big, massive world empire that we think of. They are mostly contained to the Italian peninsula still, and there are still some other big powers in the area, the main one being Carthage. And they've already had one big war with Carthage, and now they are gearing up to the second. And the Second Punic War begins with Hannibal attacking Saguntum and laying siege to it. Saguntum is like a city that is allied with Rome. And so, of course, they send messages back to Rome asking for help. And the Romans just leave them unanswered for about 8 months until the city eventually is destroyed. Sensing that the city is about to be destroyed, the player characters bribe their way out of the city. And after spending 4 hours going through character creation, we did finally get to the actual game. And that was where we started, was with the players sneaking through a sewer and running out into the beach to escape. Now, their plan was to go up the beach, find some boats, and sail across the Mediterranean back to Rome. But when they get to the boats, they find that the people they had hired to sail them to Rome are all missing and or dead. And so are the oars and sails for the boat, so they can't really do anything with it. They're all wet, and it's very cold, and it's very windy. And a couple of them, having, delicate sensibilities, they start going into shock from the cold and losing consciousness because they keep failing all of their rolls to resist exposure. Some of the players run up to this house that they see on a hill and fail a whole series of checks to alert them to the fact that this house is full of cannibal murderer hill people. They did not see the bones lying in the yard. They didn't notice they were being lied to. They couldn't even speak the language that these people spoke. They didn't really know what they were being told. They also didn't hear anybody sneaking up behind them, and they got brained over the head. One of these cannibals comes down to retrieve the other players who are still waiting at the boat, and they are a little more cautious. They end up going up there as well when this Roman dude shows up, and very nonchalantly is just like, yeah, let's just go up there and see what's going on. The players follow him up there, where they immediately get ganked by the Roman guy, who also ganks the cannibals. So the players then wake up, having been captured by this creepy Roman and his creepy Nosferatu sidekicks, and they are all tied up, and they're like these vampires are mixing up this big... My shirt is making a weird noise. They're mixing up this big cauldron of blood, and a couple of the players broke free, tried to escape, were not able to do that. They are, of course, just lowly humans at this point. They get captured, they get some spooky blood poured down their throats, and then they get their throats cut, and they end up dead. When they awaken again, they find themselves in this pit. They have been thrown into a mass grave with a bunch of other people, and they start clawing and fighting their way out until they eventually break out into the open, and there's a big spooky fuck off guy telling them to like go attack Saguntum, which the city is in the distance. And at this point he sort of compels them to like hunger frenzy towards the city, and I had the players roll for hunger frenzy and they all pass their rolls. So in an unexpected and kind of awkward moment, all of the NPC vampires frenzy and run off to go sack the city, and the players just sort of stand there in the cold looking around like, hey, what's going on? Not as dramatic as I had hoped it would be. Eventually they notice that little Maximus, poor little Maximus, is going through some very painful transformations. He's writhing around like, oh, the pains, my ribs. And realizing that he is turning into a Nosferatu, Tempest, the Bruja, who is responsible for turning them all into vampires, decides, oh, that's inconvenient, and just kills little Maximus. No! When I assigned them an NPC child, the players who were playing the husband and wife immediately were like, oh no, what are you gonna do to him? I was like, nothing. Why are you so suspicious? But yeah, I definitely killed him right away. They eventually do run into the city because when they stand around asking questions, Tempest decides to just kill them. So they flee into the city. They do end up all frenzying when they run into a bunch of fire, because when you ransack a city, a lot of it ends up on fire. The following evening, the players all wake up, and at this point they have no idea what's really happened to them. They have like a vague sense that something is wrong, but obviously they don't know that they're vampires. They don't know what vampires are. And in the course of trying to figure out what exactly has happened, Lucretia flies into a hunger frenzy. Because they're all standing in a cave, I rolled randomly to see who she would attack, and she attacked her stepdaughter and tried to eat her. The players then grab Lucretia and after some significant effort manage to pry her off of her stepdaughter. But eventually they can't, they like keep hitting Lucretia, trying to knock her out. They don't know what to do. They're like punching her really hard, and they're like, what the fuck? She's like supernaturally resistant and she's going completely apeshit. And her husband is yelling at her like, could you please not? What the fuck are you doing? And, she eventually breaks free, and I rolled again to see who she went after. And again, randomly, the dice decided she would attack and try and eat her stepdaughter. Sharpavia was not like super happy with the way things were going.
Get off of me! Ugh, as if!
They eventually hit her with a rock until she passes out. They knock her into torpor.
Get cornered, bash him in the head. That seems to work out.
And then they kind of realized that while they were doing this woman had just ridden up on a horse and just walked up into the cave. She's like, oh, sorry, I came up here to murder you and rob you. So they start talking to this woman and determine that she is also a vampire who had intended to eat them. Now that she knows they're vampires, she is not intending to eat them. But realizing that they don't know what they're doing and are completely helpless, she agrees to help them out in exchange for money and charges them 500 sesterci to guide them back to Rome. Having no other choice, they agree to pay her. Now, they had actually carried a bunch of money with them out of the city, but they lost it. And I thought that they would go back to the house of the cannibals to find it. In fact, I had even had the other cannibals, who were also now vampires, at that house, and that was going to be like a combat encounter, but they just never went back there. So I'd assumed that they would go back looking for their money, but they decided, fuck it, and just left. So they promised to pay Laergetha 500 sesterci when they get to Rome, and she escorts them to Rome. After some significant problems with Lucretia repeatedly frenzying from hunger because they just could not get any food in her, and her having to drink pretty much an entire deer just to kind of take the edge off, and after some basic guidelines from Laergetha about the fact that they are now vampires, or as Largatha says, divines, they get on a boat, and the boat starts taking them across the Mediterranean, and then they happily sail to Rome without any other issues, except that they actually get into a shipwreck and end up stuck on a little tiny island in a giant storm. When they kind of come to on this island, they find that Largatha is missing. Most of the crew are either missing or are like washed up on the beach dead. A few of them are still alive, and a couple of them are badly injured. It's really dark. It's really spooky. They right away start like accidentally using vampire powers. Like Titus is going around like looking, searching really carefully, and without trying to, because they don't understand how vampires work yet. They're new to all of this, and no one has taught them. He's like searching, and he like activates auspex, and like finds these like coins in the sand that he picks up, and they're like these really ancient looking coins. He looks at them and he's like, oh, these look like they're Egyptian or something. They're really old, but they glow for some reason. They also find this weird footprint that looks like Track of the Moon Beast.
Some form of reptile.
Yes.
Closely related to the Tyrannosaurus rex.
T-Rex has the classic pear shape.
One of the sailors tells them, don't worry guys, there's a lighthouse on this place. I'll go find it. And Lucretia's like, you probably shouldn't run off on your own. He's like, I don't need to listen to some woman, okay? I'm a man. I can go find a lighthouse. So he dies. They're like, okay, it's really cold. Let's make a fire. And so they pull themselves into like a little, they like find a tree, like Survivor Man, and they like pull the tree down, and they're like in there with like some flint and a stick trying to start a fire, and they start a fire.
Nice. Yeah.
And then they all frenzy and just run in terror into the jungle.
Fire! Burn!
At which point Shipwreck finds the lighthouse. When she goes into the lighthouse, she finds that someone has had their hands nailed to the table and then cut off. There's no sign of the person, just the hands. She returns and gives like the least helpful explanation of what she had seen, basically saying like somewhere on this island like there's a man with no hands, and everyone's like okay. Searching around in there again, Titus kind of accidentally auspexes and finds this treasure chest full of these fucking ancient coins. And when Lucretia and Sharpathia, who are, you know, have gone to school, look at these things, they're like, oh yeah, these are like ancient Mesopotamian coins or something. Then dawn comes, and they kind of pass out in here. They board the entire place up. They nail all the doors shut so that no one can attack them. And then they tell the one sailor who's still alive, they're like, okay, we're gonna go to sleep for a bit. Don't worry about it. When we wake up again, we'll go try and find a boat together. They wake up to find that the sailor tore apart all of their defenses and just ran away with the gold. Of course. They then wander around in the jungle for a while trying to find where this sailor is, and actually run into a fish person.
Salutations. Do you have a moment to talk about the Lord?
The reason that they run into this is that the fish people communicate by like singing at each other. Sharpathia just decides when she hears singing, she just starts singing back. I had not expected them to do that, so I wasn't really sure what to do. I rolled for it, and I was like, okay, well, she rolled really, really well on singing. So she tricks them, and some of these fish people just walk out of the forest like, what's up, Steve? And then like slowly back up into the forest again and run away. They don't really pursue the fish people at that point, but then they go down to the beach and they find the sailor. And the sailor is fixing a boat. They also find Largatha there. She ran into this sailor trying to escape, and she just like mesmerized him and told him like, oh, we're married now. Fix this boat for me. And he's like, okay. And he's fixing the boat. He's getting ready to sail to Rome. Briefly after that, the fish people arrive. I had expected them to fight the fish people in the lighthouse, but luckily they figured out how not to fight these fish people. They just started throwing coins at them, and the fish people started collecting the coins. Eventually, they threw all the coins and then threw the cursed treasure chest And the fish people collected all of this. And then since the fish people had their treasure, I was just like, well, I guess the fish people would just leave. So they just left. And Lagertha like said to the sailor, like, thank you so much for fixing the boat. Can we make it to Rome in just one night? And he was like, oh yeah, definitely. Like, okay, cool. And then she just like turns to the others, is like, and Lucretia, because Lucretia is still fucking hungry. She's been hungry this whole time. Lucretia just attacks him and eats him.
I thought you were trying to lose weight.
Lay off me, I'm starving!
And then they get into the ship and they sail off to Rome.
I have thwarted the malevolent machinations of our scurrilous enemies. In short, I have arrived.
Still not really knowing what they're doing, but that was the first, like, that was like session 0 and the first session and a half of Rome by Night, and I think it went pretty well. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you again in space.
Look, I gotta get back to school. Want to practice parking?
What's the point? Everywhere you go has valet.